There's another episode of Hammer and Bolter where the Death Guard corrupt an astropathic choir, so they spread a plague between choirs, and it travels through space. And it's like, what? How does that work? But it's like
because it is the human connection with it, because it is like a phone signal, but it's actually literally human string, if you know what I mean, which sounds really creepy. But obviously it's a grim dark future. But it's kind of how it works.
It's just weird in the Angels of Death one, because again they've got like this whole room of gene stealers, and there's the Patriarch, and then the tower's there, and obviously the astropaths are still human, but they're being kind of enslaved on this tower, and they're not very happy when they send the signal out being like, come and destroy the world, Tyranids. They're like having a good old shriek, and you're like, yeah, that doesn't look fun.
Love me, Star Children.
Whatever it is, it's 40K, so it's probably horrendous and doesn't need to be as horrendous as it is.
Someone most likely suffered even like
Yeah.
making a nail or a screw.
Well, that was the word from the apparent sponsor of this video, the Adeptus Astropathica.
Upgrade your cell phone to new Astropath SIM cards.
Leave the 5G towers alone.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Lorecrimes. It's time for another beginner to expert podcast, isn't it? It's going to be an interesting one today because we've covered a lot of Space Marine stuff recently, and delved into a little bit of Loyalists, a little bit of Chaos. So we've done a little bit of Xenos. We did the Necrons a little while back, but today we've got something a bit different in store, a little bit more specific as well, because today we're going to be covering the First Tyrannic War. Ooh.
Hope you're hungry, boys.
Nom nom nom. Because I think with like Tyranids in particular, it's like how do you organize talking about them? Because there's like no like personal characters with like other than I like eating things, so you have to kind of find where they fit into the lore around events. So I think this is a pretty good place to start. But before we get into that, it's time for the question of the week.
All right, our question of the week was, what makes you rage about Warhammer? #BlackRage. And the first comment I have here is, epic, cool, awesome goblin guy, re6520. Awesome
Big fan
name.
of the name.
Had to have the numbers.
Did Total War Warhammer turning my boy Throg from a smart man, in brackets troll, to the average Manchester City football fan. I don't watch football, but I like making fun of Europeans.
I walked around the soccer museum when I was there, and I can assure you that from the amount of riots I saw in the historical of the fields, that sounds about right.
This was during Warhammer Fest, and well, you said like something along the lines of when you were in Manchester Airport. You're like, I've never been in an airport like this before.
Yeah, it was so depressing. Everything was just gunmetal gray.
Yeah.
It's like when you build a Minecraft home entirely out of iron blocks and cobblestone.
Necron base coat, baby.
Definitely Manchester United, not City.
Did you enjoy the accents while you were there? You're like, all right there, sir. How are you? I'm putting my bricks up, my grey blocks in the airport. You know, what the hell is that noise?
I heard it's dangerous in Detroit.
I did enjoy the accents.
Sounds like Nova Scotians.
There was one gentleman next to me on the phone when I was checking into the hotel that he was speaking Lovecraftian. That was not English. Like it was English, but like the words coming out of that man's mouth, I could not tell you.
Did he quote have the Innsmouth look? Is that right, Hal?
Yes.
Did he have that fisheye stare? I didn't get a look at him. He might have.
No chin, just uni neck or something.
Glob.
All right. Next question or next comment is from C Pint. He says, I rage every day that the superior Skaven race has yet to tunnel through the warp into the 41st millennium to completely body the other factions.
Big true.
Big true indeed.
We had a theme
Next,
about
yes.
this. A couple of like comments on the Skaven one, like why they're not in 40k. This is absolutely heresy.
They used to be the Hrud, and then the Hrud got turned into weird, like I don't know,
Maggot
weird
men.
like. No, they're not even maggot men. They're like people,
yeah.
but they've got scales and no necks. They're like torso people.
I'm gonna brag that I literally have the only commissioned artwork of an actual Hrud out there, which I did for a Dantiok episode video for mine. It's the only one of an actual. I remember speaking to the artist, and he's like, "What do they look like?" And I went, "Hold on 1 second, I just need. I don't have an example." And like, I'm screwed.
Like this is the only image of a Hrud nowadays. They used to be little space skaven.
Oh yeah, look at that
I
thing.
found there's an old picture that used to be the only
Look
image
at
of
that thing.
Hrud. You can see him in the middle. He's got it. He's
They're
got
furry.
a tail.
Feels bad. No fuzzy guys anymore.
No fuzzy little rabbit. There's also Necron listed as unknown, which is very funny.
Nice. And Groot
Little did they
Nocturnal
know.
Warrior of Hrud. Oh, there he is right there. Yeah, I see. He's literally a Skaven. What the heck?
Yeah, they used to just be space skaven, but then they
What's
got
this-
turned into
What's this jellyfish guy?
unknown.
Fair.
That's one of the
Alright.
lost Primarchs.
That's why they kicked him out. He was too gross to look at.
You don't have any bones. Get out.
Poor guy. Next comment is from the Commissar Stab Wound 1287. Also a fun name.
That's a great name.
He says, the worst thing about James' workshop is that even though they constantly betray me, they've still somehow convinced me to shamelessly spend half of my paycheck on their plastic toys. Very real and very true. I must agree.
My favorite part is that all the new models are the good models on tabletop, so therefore you have to keep
Classic.
buying it.
Classic. I bought
ends.
more Lord of the Rings.
My favorite
Oh,
part
no.
is how they erased the firstborn from existence.
Oh, makes me sad.
Forget the promise of technology and progress, except for when it involves us buying new models.
Yeah,
And
for
don't
real.
forget it.
There
Oh,
is
man.
only Primaris. Ah.
Feels bad. Okay, last comment is Roger Shaftley 6976. He says Hal and Andy's breakfast heresy, eating canned beans on toast and blood sausage, but acting like honey on English muffins is crazy.
I
Very
mean,
based.
Now look.
okay.
Look here, right? You can't have sugary sweet stuff
Yeah,
first
yeah,
thing in the
yeah,
morning. It's bad.
Don't
It's
make me
bad
get
for
the,
you.
don't make me get the American food starter pack out again.
Listen, okay, British food may taste like a ration pack, but okay. First of all, no one eats blood sausage. That's like a really rare thing. Like no one actually has that. It's like in hotels.
Is he thinking of black
Maybe.
pudding, where it's like
Yeah.
Scottish? Well, yeah, I mean, you get that in full English, but like a lot of the time, people are like, "Ew," and they just scrape it off their plate. So like, I want the sausages. What is this thing? Ugh.
I mean,
Wow.
I
full
would
en-
like a full English, I ain't gonna lie.
full English
It
is
doesn't-
a hangover cure. That's what it's meant to be.
Mm,
At
I
least
could
in my
gobble one of
experience.
Why is it called pudding? This isn't pudding.
those. Right?
Made of blood.
Depends on the angle you see it.
Blood
From a
is
distance.
pudding of life, I guess.
This
Just
is
ask the
meat.
blood angel.
This is meat, not pudding.
It's congealed blood and stuff.
Lovely.
Tasty.
If someone told me
Scottish.
I was gonna get pudding and they flopped down a hamburger, I'd be upset. I'd be angry.
I mean,
Oh,
to be
goodness.
fair though, technically I'm not British, so I can like slightly push myself away from the aspersions that I don't know good food because I'm also from a place that has French cuisine. So I'm like,
At
look
least,
at the
at
British.
least Colin also agreed that pudding has to be sweet, not breakfast.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, pudding's not a breakfast dessert, but that doesn't mean you can't have sweet stuff at breakfast.
shouldn't
Yeah,
Doesn't
you
mean
can
you
have
can't
pudding
have
breakfast
Ben
if
and
you want
Jerry's
to.
for breakfast.
Okay,
Sure you can.
Listen, the breakfast debate should be safe.
Hey,
from
we
not
live in
one
a
of
free
our
country
podcasts.
where you can have anything you want for breakfast.
We're all adults. If I want to eat ice cream for breakfast and shit my brains out, then by God, I have that power.
For the people who came for their Warhammer, rip. But
Anyways, we'll get back to the Warhammer.
with that being said, though, the next question of the week is: you want to sabotage the hive mind? What do you feed it? Hashtag tummy ache. Of course, people. The funnier the answer, the better. We particularly love the funny ones. They actually warm our souls. And okay, don't feel free to make it a safe answer. Go wild within reason. I'm looking at you people who swear in some of the comments. But with with that being said, though, we're going to hand it over to Eli for the beginner section.
Thank you. And also, the British slander about British food feeding to the hive mind is a good idea. Don't forget it.
Feed them blood sausage. That'll.
And now we'll return to the podcast.
Awesome. But before we get into the beginner section here, I just want to have a little brief introduction just for if you are possibly new to Lorecrimes. This is the beginner to expert podcast. So if you're completely new to Warhammer, or you perhaps are already deliciously involved with so much of the lore, like an expert, hopefully there's a few more details in this one that you maybe have missed, or it's a nice sort of exploration of things that you already know and love. And obviously there's me, Hal, there's Andy, Colin, and Eli, and we'll be guiding you through this journey, and I hope you all enjoy. But with that being said, though, I do believe Eli will be helming us straight in to this juicy topic. Eli, are you ready?
I am ready, sir.
Take it away.
I'll keep it short and sweet for the beginner section, because this is not a ton of lore to begin with, and I don't want to take too much away from Colin. So here's an extremely brief summary. This is the First Tyrannic War, which was the first time the Tyranids were discovered by human beings. I don't know if they were discovered or fought by other species in the galaxy before this. Might be the very first time at all. Pretty sure it is. It's High Fleet Behemoth. They came in through the Eastern Fringe, and they were first found on the planet Tyran, or at least the aftermath of them was found, because they absolutely obliterated the defenders on Tyran, and so Inquisitor Cryptman found a dead and lifeless planet, which he then found a codex containing the knowledge of the Tyranids. And this kind of gave him the idea that maybe there's a big deal going on, so he went to go tell the Ultramarines about it, because it's on the fringes of Ultramar. High Fleet Behemoth kept raging on through the galaxy, destroying every planet in their way, until finally coming to Macragge, where they were stopped for a time. Spoilers, I guess. And on Macragge, they fought a glorious, incredible battle. It was the most important battle in Ultramarines history, or so the Codex claims, at least. I think I would agree. And the Ultramarines had to pull back all of their forces from around the galaxy, which actually saved the Tau Empire. So the Tyranids saved the Tau. Keep that in mind.
My boy Farsight lived.
He did. There was yeah, it was fine, I guess. I don't know.
He was battling Cato Sicarius, and so he managed to live.
He was about to win, and then he got on the comms that you should not kill this guy because we have to leave. Don't take this next 10 seconds to kill the main character, please. And then he didn't. And it's like, I like Parsons, so I'm not that mad. But the plot convenience certainly worked there. And so all the Ultramarines come back to Macragge, and they fight on the Battle of Macragge, and it's pretty epic. And that's all I'm going to say. There's really... I don't want to get too much into the details. Colin will do that. And that's that. So, without further ado, Mr. Colin will tell us all about the First Tyrannic War.
I would be happy to. Now, as a bit of a forewarning, actually, I guess there's two things I wanted to just quickly say. One, this is, of course, not the beginner to expert necessarily on the Tyranids, so in the future, we'll probably cover, go more in depth on the various bioforms and quote-unquote special characters of the Tyranids, but this is a beginner to expert of the First Tyrannic War, not the second and third, or indeed the fourth one that is now happening in the lore, but just the first one.
Quite trendy war that's going on right now.
And two is that while everyone remembers, thinks about it as just the Battle of Macragge, and then that's the end of the war. For a while, it was actually just Inquisitor Cryptman's wild ride. The Ultramarines are not as prominent as I think. Well, they're prominent in the end, but throughout a decent chunk of it, they were busy fighting the Tau, funnily enough. So, with that little forewarning, the First Tyrannic War. The First Tyrannic War is a card in Magic the Gathering. You may put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield. If its mana cost contains X, it enters the battlefield with a number of 1/1. I don't know what that means. On it equal to the number of lands you control, and then you double it, and then you sacrifice it. There's a Magic the Gathering card that's just the First Tyrannic War. I don't know how Magic works.
How do you throw an entire war at someone?
It's an enchantment dash saga. Someone knows what that means listening.
It's like a thing that goes on throughout the game. As a saga enters And after your draw step, add a lore counter, sacrifice after 3. So yeah, it progresses every turn, and then you get rid of it. I play Magic. I'm cool.
I will say quickly before we get in, I actually got into Warhammer when the box set, just for people who are like possibly new or like they may not even remember, there was like a proper box set called like the Battle of, I think it's Battle of Macragge, isn't it? And that was what they do obviously with many edition launches or big events. It's like a bigger time to launch a set of minis, like what's currently going now at the time of recording with oh my god, we've actually seen the box set at Warhammer Fest. What's it called? Leviathan? Yeah,
Leviathan.
That's heretical. So I remember seeing that as like a kid, and then sort of the Battle of Macragge, and there's that really old. I say really old. There's some people listening who are like really old, really. You know what I mean? Like it's not old, but the kind of old school cover art for the
baby.
Ultramarines. The guy has like the dual. I think it is
minus calgar.
Yeah, it's on that kind of
bang, 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 bang.
It's a classic art piece.
That classic piece, which was like properly because GW had a time where they kind of were less grimdark, and then they've kind of at certain times it's more reserved. Like the grimdark art style is more reserved for a certain faction, like more like chaos. But I remember seeing that as a kid, thinking that's so cool. I can't wait to get more into it.
Indeed.
Arnius just channeling his inner Doom guy cover, just like, yeah, I can do the thing where I stand on a big pile and there's lots of alien stuff. Bang.
He does a real will.
Indeed. Speaking of Hal going off, getting more into it, I have a quote for you, Hal. I only have one this episode because the bugs don't have a lot of quotes, and I flipped a coin.
Other than that's what they say.
Aggressive hissing.
Yeah. And so, with that great responsibility, I flipped a coin that landed on heads. There you go, Hal. Would you mind reading this introductory quote out for the class? It's in the general sidebar that you and me tend to forget exists.
Yes, my pain. An alien threat has risen from beyond the abyss. A swarm so vast that it blots out the stars. This horror fights neither for power nor territory, but rather to feed a hunger so insatiable it would eventually devour the entire galaxy. Dun dun dun.
So,
it doesn't say dun 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 by
it does
adding
not
that.
say, but it's an appropriate addition, I would say.
And there's a little Tyranid waving in the background, like that's me, just like in the crowd, all shy.
So that was Inquisitor Cryptman on the Tyranids. So an Inquisitor is saying that this is perhaps the greatest threat the Imperium has to face, and in this case, I might have to say I agree with him. Tyranids quite the problem, shall we say?
Perhaps we should exterminate.
You can't exterminate space.
Do you reckon like Inquisitors have like a nickname for like? Did you throw a cheeky extermi or something? Like everyone, because at some point it must be so like there's like a well I imagine that it's obviously meant to be reserved in terms of lore wise, like a big like the end of worlds.
How have you been these days, Inquisitor so? Oh, I've been a bit naughty, if you know what I mean. There you go.
Amberley Vale and
Kane. I ruined it.
But just a little bit of background. This is the first time the Tyranids have been recorded. So just a little bit of brief background on how this came to be. We go back to the Horus Heresy. Shout out to Barabbas d'Antioch, who detonated a device called the Pharos. So the Night Lords couldn't use it. It was a mini Astronomicon, which is basically a beacon to guide through the warp. And when it went critical, it made a big old flash, both in reality and the immaterium, the warp. And 10,000 years ago, when this happened, the hive mind of the Tyranids took notice and shifted course over to the Milky Way.
It literally did that meme where it's like, Horus Heresy, I sleep. Pharos explodes, I wake. It's just the eyes with the big...
Pretty much, yeah. It was just eyes took it in, and they changed course. They have actually been in the galaxy since, at the latest, M35, believe it or not. It's just they were never classified as such as Tyranids, which is why the First Tyrannic War is the First Tyrannic War, and not Here Are the Tyranids Again, Round 2. There was one hive fleet that was not known to be a hive fleet Ouroboros, which was fought in M36. And in M35, hive fleet Tiamat was discovered, but because of the nature of that hive fleet, which we may get into later in a different episode, the Imperium thought it was just the native, particularly angry life forms of one planet in particular.
We know the real reason that they weren't called Tyranids is because they weren't near the planet Tyran, so they'd have rubbish names.
That's
What
right.
would they be called? Like, oh, it's the Borealis. Oh, they're near the Borealis. They're the Borealis. No, that's not a good name for an
That one
Xenos.
sucks.
Yeah.
But the initial beginning of the proper Tyrannic Wars is M41, year 742. So for some amount of time in the eastern fringes of the galaxy, it was noted amongst Imperial officials that for whatever strange reason, planets that were recorded as being, lush and verdant and having ample life on them, when someone, did a flyby by them a second time, they were dead and barren. Just gone from, like, a nice jungle or forest world or what have you, to completely dead rock, no atmosphere, no nothing on it. Even a great deal of the minerals on them had seemingly been mined out, and the planet was just a rock in space now. So, good old Inquisitor Fidus Cryptman, who's very important to Tyranid lore, was sent to that region of space to figure out what the hell is going on. What's the problem here? And one of the planets was, it's barren as the rest of them. It was once the ocean world of Tyran Prime. It was a Mechanicus little research outpost, and all Cryptman found of that outpost was a single signal being that was broadcasting into space that was buried thousands of meters below the planet's surface in like a bore shaft, like for mining or research into the core or what have you. So he finds this and figures this is as good a lead as any. It's all I got so far beyond empty planets, and it details the fall of the planet Tyran as these these bug-like aliens were in such great numbers they blotted out the sky and devoured everyone in the Mechanicus station, and evidently the rest of the planet itself, because it was an ocean, and suddenly there's no more ocean to be had. And with this, the Tyranids, as they are now known, named in honor of the planet Tyran, where the beginning of proper knowledge of the threat happened. Cryptman's off to figure out how am I going to deal with this? What exactly is going on? The guy who hit it has a name, Magos Varnak. Shout out to Magos Varnak for hiding that information beneath the surface and preventing the Imperium from being devoured whole.
He was a real
Very
one.
cool. Good work.
Unfortunately, all that lives on in him is some calories in a Tyranid's stomach.
And not many, because he was a Magos. Like, it's like a morsel.
Yeah, true.
They do eat metal, so he could have been maybe not all metal, like they don't eat living metal, but who knows? Maybe whatever he was made out of had a high calorie count.
The machine is immortal, even when it's in the Tyranid's gullet.
Well,
Cool.
it's like, what is it? Like uranium has a calorie count of like 65 million per gram.
Don't tell the
Tasty.
gym bros.
That's-
Tell the
that's-
gym
We
bros.
could solve world hunger so easily with that, actually.
That's the real reason you can't eat uranium. You'll get fat. That's the only reason.
Everyone just has to take a bite at once at the same time.
Just a lick, just a little nibble. It's fine.
But Magos Varnak took a chance on just a hope that someone would find it, and luckily Cryptman found it. And now armed with just a little bit of knowledge about the Tyranid threat, namely that there's a lot of them and they're eating people, he rushed back to Imperial space proper to figure out the Tyranid's next move. He named this particular instance of the threat Behemoth, or Behemoth. I usually say Behemoth, but I call it Behemoth when I'm talking about the Hive Fleet. I don't know why. But named it Behemoth for a tradition that is great threats are given the name of ancient Terran beasts, which I don't think that tradition has ever been used once, except with the Tyranids.
Is it kind of like hurricanes, isn't it? Like if they give the hurricane a mild name, people aren't as scared of it, so they have to give them more scary ones.
Have you seen Hurricane Tallulah? Like, yeah, I'm not too bothered.
Jenny doesn't sound that intimidating.
Neither did Hurricane Andrew, and then ask New Orleans or Katrina. Ask New
Yeah.
Orleans how that one went.
It takes a whole new meaning after, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's my name. Oh dear.
But hurricanes and name traditions that may or may not actually be used outside of this instance aside, the Tyranids, meanwhile, as Kurtman was doing his investigating, continued their path of destruction. There's a couple standout worlds they ate. One was a Oculus, is what its name was. It was a massive biological research station that the Mechanicus were using. It wasn't actually Imperial in origin, interestingly enough. It was captured by them in M31. So the immediate aftermath of the Horus Heresy, they got this thing, and for 9,000 years, they just kind of held on to it. Unfortunately, biological means this thing is made out of food, and this station that had been firmly in Imperial control for 9,000 years was devoured pretty quickly.
It was a buffet.
The whole thing this time, because it was a big research station, and again, all of it organic in like nature on some level. All of it made out of food, so it went from a moon-sized thing to nothing. Like there wasn't even a world behind.
Just for something, if you're particularly new around Warhammer, or maybe you know it already a little bit, when the Tyranids devour a planet, it's generally the actual like the bug, the chitinous monsters that you see. They're usually one of like they're actually how to say it, forerunners. Halo reference. They're kind of like the forerunners of the Hive, but the actual devouring does come later. So basically, there's a wave of Tyranids that clean up any resistance, and then kind of like massive tendrils, like literally poke through the planets, and then they rip apart things.
Fleets like dock with them almost and absorb the nutrients.
And they make little like weird pools of acid, essentially, where they just even the previous Tyranids that have invaded, like the actual monster ones, they literally just chuck themselves into the like bubbling pool. But it's like they make like stomachs essentially all over the planet, and then they kind of drain the most of the life away like a kind of vein or.
They're very good at recycling.
Very good.
Yeah, and that's that. So the actual devouring part usually comes after the war thing. They usually have completely annihilated a civilization in like a night or something, and then they just go yum yum dinner time.
Yeah, and then
it does remind me of Dead Space again, where it's like the necromorphs, they just get rid of all the living people, and then they're like, oh, we'll move all the flesh into a big thing, and that's what we do.
Yeah, move the flesh, because it is kind of I don't know how to explain it, but it is the Tyranid actual like monster things. They're not really the Tyranids, if you know what I mean.
They're not the things that do the eating.
They're not. They're only a very small portion of it, which is hard to kind of grasp. The actual portion of it is just a massive floating biomass.
Tyranids are basically the worker bees.
Pretty much, yeah. But then imagine that like, the hive is like the size of a planet, and there's like only a few bees. So
and the bees have teeth and claws, and it's really scary.
And there's an infinite amount of angry bees just outside of you.
Hornets upon hornet's nest.
Yeah.
Oh god.
But there goes Oculus. Thank you for existing to be eaten by the Tyranids. Up next, the Orc freebooters world of Jaga. It's not just Imperials getting the worst of it. It was at one point one of the largest threats to the Imperium in the Segmentum, just for shipping and trading, because it was quite the gathering of orcs. They had great battleships and orc battleships, granted, so held together with duct tape and spit. But it works enough to be a threat. And then the Tyranids showed up, and even though it was a very destructive battle, there were no orcs alive by the end of that. So the Hive Fleet is just continuing onward, going to grow, and rather confounding Cryptman as he's trying to investigate this, because if it was just attacking Imperial worlds, they'd be like, alright, Xeno's threat doesn't like humanity, I can work with this. But now it's attack the orcs, so what's their end goal? Because again, we know what the Tyranids are about because we're out of universe. In universe, this was the Imperium's first time actually documenting them properly, so no one really was sure what the hell the end goal of the Tyranids was. As he's trying, to figure out what's going on here, he's been ordering his astropath as like the Imperium phone network, except the phone is a living human being. To contact the rest of the Imperium and warn of what's coming. The problem is another new discovery to be made, is an effect of the Tyranid hive mind, the shadow in the warp, where the sheer psychic presence of the hive mind completely blocks off the ability to communicate through the warp. It's just, there's so many bugs, and it's such a powerful psychic presence of the total hive mind. You can't get through. It does other stuff. It also makes warp travel damn near impossible, and it can even prevent psyker powers from being used. But the communications blackout is, in this case, the worst of it, for Cryptman's purposes. There is a nearby planet of Thandros, which could hold the key to getting some kind of message out. It was an astropathic booster station. So it's like a cell phone tower. You get good reception there.
It's like 40K's equivalent of a 5G tower.
Yeah.
It's like 500,000 G.
Plug your astropath into it.
Oh my god.
I think
I just imagine that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
I think you could plug them into it. What exactly they do with it is just kind of described as them using it. How exactly? Feel free to interpret.
I mean, I know in the Warhammer TV show Angels of Death, there's a bit where the Tyranids have corrupted an astropathic choir, and they're kind of tied to a mast of sorts, and then when they're trying to send the signal out going, yay, we're going to liberate the planet, they're all like screaming. They're still alive, but they're like coupled to the device. So I'm not sure, but maybe it's like a signal booster or something like that just amplifies their powers.
There is one in one of the Yarrick books, the one on Armageddon, and the way they explain it is when they call it a choir, it's because it's the room that they're in is kind of assembled like a choir. When there's almost like a conductor in the middle, who's like the main astropath / who's navigator in a way, and then sort of the rest of them act as like boosts. It's kind of like how psychic power works in Warhammer, where sometimes just being around other psychers, if you connect with them, you can actually like sort of accentuate each other's powers. And particularly with the astropathic ones, they kind of use it as like when it's like an actual tower, they don't need the actual structure of the tower to be used, but it doesn't really help the tower itself. It's actually the people who are assembled in this, but they're very important. And the way obviously the Grimdark universe works is they don't rely on AI, so obviously that's why there's like obviously things like servers, and, basically everything's half human, half machine at that point. And so they just use the boosting choir of all these psychers in this room to then, but they basically kind of all collectively shout into the warp, and they basically go, "Hey!" And they're like, "Listen,
oi, oi, oi!" What? Oh, there we go. There he is.
Yeah.
Mom,
also a little,
Mom.
It's a bit. Alan is such like the chipmunks, but they kind of, it's difficult as well in Warhammer because it's so, you're trying to basically send a signal. It's like a bullet trying to go through water, where like it eventually will slow down and then things get in the way of it. So they kind of, they have to send like a very short, weird message that only other astropaths can interpret.
Yeah,
it's really weird. There's another episode of Hammer and Bolter where the Death Guard corrupt an astropathic choir, so they spread a plague between choirs, and it travels through space. And it's like, what? How does that work? But it's like,
because it is the human connection with it, because it is entirely, it is like a phone signal, but it's actually literally human string, if you know what I mean, which sounds really creepy. But obviously it's a grim dark future. But it's kind of how it works.
It's just weird in the Angels of Death one, because again they've got like this whole room of gene stealers, and there's the Patriarch, and then the tower's there, and obviously the astropaths are still human, but they're being kind of enslaved on this tower, and they're not very happy when they send the signal out being like, come and destroy the world, Tyranids. They're like having a good old shriek, and you're like, yeah, that doesn't look fun.
Love me, Star Children.
Whatever it is, it's 40K, so it's probably horrendous and doesn't need to be as horrendous as it is.
Someone most likely suffered. Even to even like making a nail or a screw.
Well, that was the word from the apparent sponsor of this video, the Adeptus Astropathica.
Upgrade your cell phone to new Astropath SIM cards.
Leave the 5G towers alone.
But yeah, booster station, planet of Thantros. Sends out Big Yell. It too was still nonetheless blocked. But it was also Critman's best chance of getting anything out. Maybe he could jury rig something. He's an inquisitor. They tend to be smart fellas. Maybe he can figure something out. So, on the journey there, he's observing more and more worlds that, much like the initial ones in the reports that caused him to go out to begin with, were also stripped clean of life, and combine that with previous evidence, what he learned on Tyran and just observations. He realized that the Tyranids, there is no, like, the grand strategic plan of the Tyranids is that they don't have one. There's no plan, there's no ideological motivations. They're just bulldozing through the galaxy to get to the all-you-can-eat buffet that is everyone inside of it. The only quote-unquote path you can track with the Tyranids is form a line of all of the, like, lush, like, bio-rich worlds that are in front of them. And that's probably where they're going to go, because, again, there is no motivation. There is just hunger for the Tyranids. Critman gets to Thantros, and to absolutely no one's surprise, it too has been devoured. The defenses it had completely run dry, but being even less defended than Tyran, it was promptly consumed, and Tyranids left, moved on as they do. They do not stay around to fortify or infest a planet. If you've ever played Stellaris, there's the Prethor Scourge that's pretty heavily based on the Tyranids. Those guys stick around to form a planet, or to terraform a planet and use it to make new bioships. Tyranids don't do that.
Cravers.
Or Cravers. Well, Cravers also don't do that. But Cravers are also part metal, so they're weird. They were designed
They're
to.
Cooler Tyranids.
They are pretty cool. They're not unfallen, though. They can never be trees.
And Scottish
Billions
trees.
must tree.
Scottish billions must root. But yeah, they get to Thantros, and Critman is in a bit of a pickle now. But there is a bit of a bright spot, because whatever equipment that isn't just more screaming psychers has largely been left untouched by the Tyranids, it not being food and therefore of complete uninterest to them. Meanwhile, the High Fleet is Behemoth is getting up to some more hijinks. Some tendrils of it passed by Solemnus, where, if you know a bit about that, the home planet of Trazyn the Infinite and his galactic museum.
My beloved.
The best guy. They pass by looking for food, as they do. Again, they're not hunting anything beyond, like, specific beyond food as a concept. So they pass by, and they register the threat that is the Necrons and the complete lack of any biomass they would gain from it, aside from maybe, like, a couple people and animals Trazyn has frozen in his museum. Not enough to be worth invading. So those tendrils of Behemoth just kind of float on by and eventually enter hibernation, as they could not find rich enough worlds in biomass in time.
Almond Necron W.
Common Necron W indeed. Although
they do seem to be the hard counter to Tyranids in a lot of ways.
That's good. They don't. They offer the Necrons nothing. Chaos as well.
Apart from the flayed ones, it's like you could nibble on my flayed ones face a little, but it's not going to be enough to make the journey worth it, is it?
Yeah, you know that you can feed one gaunt with that.
Yeah.
There's also an instance of Behemoth devouring the fortress world of Siberi, a planet held by the Heretic Astartes Death Shadows chapter. May that horrible, edgy name live on forever in the stomach of Behemoth, the Death Shadows. Which further proves Griffman's point, incidentally, of them just being here for food. Because although they cannot eat demons, the Tyranids, because they're just made out of warp stuff and emotions, you can eat the followers of Chaos pretty well. And Siberi wasn't a demon world proper, it was a fortress world Chaos was squatting in. So the Tyranids showed up, and then there was no more fortress world. It was just a whole lot of dead traitors. Which, good for them. At least the Tyranids are an equal opportunity monster. Back to Cryptman, because like I was saying at the beginning, a large portion of the of the First Tyrannic War is Cryptman's wild ride across the eastern fringes of the Imperium. As
Cryptman's bizarre adventure.
Yeah, that's right.
Macragge is unbreakable.
Yeah.
But with things getting even more dire, because every minute he can't warn the Imperium is probably another world that's falling, he's able to figure out the course of the hive mind and realize that, they're going to Ultramar, the home of the Ultramarines. And for several reasons, this is bad. One, of course, is Ultramarines' first founding chapter, one of the original legions. They've got a lot of good stuff, and if they die, that's quite the loss to the Imperium. Two is that this is all taking place, just for reference, probably could have started with this, but here we are, is Segmentum Ultima, the easternmost of the Imperium segmentums, which are like the largest division of Imperial space. It's kind of like anyone, like, you describe America as like the Midwest, the East Coast, the West Coast. It's like that for the Imperium, just in space. The problem with that is that if Ultramar falls, it's not only a very built-up realm with a lot of people in it that would vastly feed the Tyranids, but because of the sheer size of the segmentum, it means that this is one of like the only major like defensive lines you can form against the Tyranids.
It's got quite a distance between it and Terra as well, so it's a big outpost quite far away from the throne world, and it's like if that falls, then that's a big like exposed area that leads straight to Terra. It's not close, but it's a quite direct route where it's like, oh, that's like a big bulwark against whatever's on the east, which is a really horrible place for most of the time. We want that where it is.
It's just
Billions would have to Ultra.
Oh yeah. It's just the sheer size of like the segmentum means that it's by nature very decentralized. So yeah, Macragge falls, and suddenly the Tyranids have free reign over what makes up like a third of all Imperial space. Like that's the last solid defensive point you can make before it's open season for the Tyranids. And although no one quite knows about the Tyranids' adaptability yet, what we know is that they integrate the genes of whatever they eat. And at this point in the lore, Rabute Gilliman is still laying in slumber on Macragge. So if they eat that, the Tyranids...
Tyranid Primarch. Tyranid Primarch, that'd be so cool.
Primarch time. The Tyranids are suddenly going to know how to do their taxes very well. Cryptman is actively just like... He's doing everything he can, and he is horrified. What remained, though, like I said, they did not eat all of Thandros' relay. They salvaged it, used it on Cryptman's astropath. Again, how exactly they did, I don't know. Maybe they got the corpses of like the skulls of the Psykers and sang. Maybe they just plugged something into the guy. The specifics could not find, I'm afraid.
Well, I mean, at least if the Angels of Death series is anything to go by, it's like they maybe don't kill them. They just like put them on life support, and then they're like, "You're still useful." But then once that use isn't used, we'll eat you. It's like, oh, these are useful, Yeah.
But whatever it was, they managed to get out a message at great effort and strain on the Psyker's mind, with Macragge itself being the only thing to answer the call. So it's time to go to Ultramar. Cryptman manages to beat the hive mind Behemoth to Macragge, and he has a meeting with Marnanius Calgarius himself, Big Daddy Calgar. He listens patiently to the Inquisitor. Calgar's a cool dude. He knows Cryptman's definitely got some good insight to be shared. And with that, the Ultramarines prepare for battle on the planet of Perondium in Macragge. It's a lush garden forest world that is described. It was described in the reading I did as a wonder of the Imperium. It's like the like Garden of Eden, the planet, and the Ultramarines, as it is part of Ultramar, they're bound to protect it. And it didn't go so hot for the Smurfs.
Oh no!
It was a slaughter, and not not against the Tyranids. The tactics they used, they did a lot of things like, like hit and run, aerial harassment tactics, split up. Tactics that against, like a mortal enemy, with like supply lines and whatnot and field commanders, all that kind of stuff, lieutenants, would be very effective. The problem is the Tyranids' combat doctrine is to have a massive blob of violence and just kind of move it forward at breakneck speed into your front lines.
Yeah, the Ultramarines are like, let's target the commander. And they're like seeing a big sea of them, like, all right, what's your best guess? Which one's in charge? I don't know. They all look similar.
Yeah. Which, to be fair, they would later learn that the Tyranids do have their own twisted version of commanders. But again, you need to keep in mind, First Tyrannic War, this is the first proper battle against, war against them. They don't know what those creatures look like yet. So, like you're saying, Andy, that one looks like the commander. I don't know. It's that.
I would say it reminds me of when people think about particularly like Napoleonic era war, everyone goes like, why do they all just stand up in a line and then fire in combat that way? And it's always because at some point when war advances in technology, there was always this seems to be the most effective with what technology / what enemy we're facing. I think there's another, if I remember correctly, what's the one between France and Prussia, where suddenly Prussia changed the game when instead of having line infantry, it changed to basically breaking things down to squads. I think it was the Prussian Wars with Napoleon the nephew. War. That one, yeah, where kind of the entire battlefield, or the Prussians changed the quote unquote the game, and it's the same way now, where the Tyranid threat essentially is this is an enemy who doesn't fight in the way that we would expect them to, and now for the Ultramarines, they're it's clearly whatever we've been doing warfare before, it's literally failed us now because the enemy's advanced beyond it.
Yeah, I don't remember who said the quote, but it's something along the line of every general is perfectly prepared for the last war.
Like the difference between World War I and II. It's
yeah.
We can't use trenches anymore. It's like, what? That's my thing. It's like, no,
my shovel and everything.
We can't do trenches anymore. It doesn't work.
It's like in the context of trench warfare, the Maginot Line was a masterpiece. Unfortunately, Germany had tanks.
Yeah.
They did not. They went around. Ultramarines took some pretty bad losses, was not great. Prondium was forced to be sacrificed to the Tyranids, which is a major problem, and not only because Ultramarines lost, Tyranids win, but because as such a lush and wonderfully verdant world, it pretty much just replenishes the Tyranid losses, so it's like the battle may as well have not happened from their point of view. The planet of Calth also fell because, of course it did. It's Calth. Nothing good ever happens on Calth.
For reference, there was a massive battle at Calth during the Horus Heresy. For people who might not know Horus Heresy lore, and essentially the Word Bearers just Tracer Legion Word Bearers essentially ambushed the not yet suspected they unsuspectingly betrayed the Imperium openly, and they decimated many of the Ultramarines' Legion, time period. So there were hundreds of thousands of Ultramarines who perished on Calth. So Calth has seen a lot of. Calth was the Ruin Storm, which was that massive warp storm that.
Yeah, Calth had a bad because that specifically was the first battle the Ultramarines partook in, and it was the one where they weren't prepared for it. They lost 100,000 Marines, and then as a last act of I hate you, Erebus and the Word Bearers also poisoned its sun to irradiate Calth, so you can't stand on the surface for more than a few minutes if you're a space marine, let alone a human. It's it's not good. It's a bad, nasty place.
It's I'll jump ahead a little bit, to the end of war. The aftermath is described as Prondium being the only major world that fell, which means Calth doesn't even get to be called a major world anymore.
Rip.
It got so ruined in the heresy and the time afterwards. They don't even count it.
The people still live, because of the first incident at Calth, they eventually were forced underground.
Yeah.
Calth used to be beautiful, long time, 10,000 years ago.
And then it got Lorgard.
It got. Well, Logar wasn't there. It got error busted.
And Corferon. It was it got word buried. They got some literacy done. Oh no.
And after this tremendous shit show, two things of note happened. One far more important than the other. Feel free to decide which is the more important one. One is that Marneus Calgar fasted and meditated for a week straight. He just went into a trance, like just thinking about what happened. How do we?
That's badass.
How do we not let this happen again? Very cool hunger strike. And he came out and declared that the Ultramarines' pride had guided them to a vastly changing galaxy. It had been 10,000 years since the damn thing was written, and I think it was what I read was the Codex is written for Space Marines. Space Marines aren't written for the Codex. If you need more, what's up?
Okay, sorry. I'll go ahead and finish. I'll jump in after.
I would say if you need more reason to hate Leandros, it should be noted that Marneus Calgar himself said the Codex is not everything, and yet we still have Leandros being the absolute worst. Going, your book said this is bad.
Titus, you shouldn't jump out of the ship like a badass. The book says it's naughty. It's like, shut up. No one likes you, Leandros.
It's action.
I love the Russian Badger video. It's like the Codex Astartes does not support this reaction. Shut the fuck up, Leandros.
I was gonna say, just for context for some people, the Codex Astartes, which was written from an Ultramarine perspective by Guilliman at the end of the Heresy to sort of split up the legions into chapters. Again, so basically no being would be able to wield Imperial forces to the level like a Primarch would, so there'll be no way to portray it to the same level.
It's so like if a chapter goes rogue, it's like a chapter, not a legion.
Yeah, and it's the final word to put a bow after the big civil war where like hundreds of thousands of Space Marines and billions of people died, and Gilliam's like, right, this is the book about how that's not going to happen again. You know, okay, take it seriously.
And there's like this 10,000-year-old scripture. I call it scripture because the Ultramarines themselves, it is the 41st millennium, so obviously there's the God Emperor of mankind, and it is very much worshipped as like the Bible for them. So it's just absolutely crazy that in the context of this, the chapter master Marneus Calgar of the Ultramarines would say the Codex is not good enough for this, which is
it's like the Pope taking a few pages out of the Bible and going, "We don't need this. We don't." It's like, what are you doing? You can't do that.
Very good analogy. It's like the Pope saying, "Listen, the Bible doesn't have social media rules in it. We need an update," and he'd be like, "What the hell?"
It should also be noted that the only thing Guilliman demanded everyone follow from the Astartes was the organizational reforms, like you can't have legions anymore. That's a no-no. You can't do that. All of the tactics in it were like, that was Guilliman just codifying tactics so people could use them. So, funnily enough, by Calgar going, the Codex doesn't have anything. That's ironically exactly what Guilliman would want you to think. He's like, listen, this is just what I know. You do what you do best. You don't need to listen to anything. You don't need to listen to anything but the, no more legions business in this book. So, funnily enough, Calgar came to a realization that Guilliman probably would have given a little pat on the back for. The second thing, the vastly more important thing, who cares about the Ultramarines shaking off 10,000 years of tradition stagnation? Who cares? The real thing is on the planet of Calth before the fighting ended, one mad lad managed to blast a Tyranid in the face, a creature known as a Carnifex, so a quite big threat, in the face with a plasma bolt, and it fell. Its brain and skull was seared, the right side of its face just completely burned off, and the beast was declared dead, and its body was frozen as the winter snows set in. Surely nothing bad will come of that surely dead beast that I will not be covering in about 10 to 15 minutes. Surely nothing. But it's time for the Macragge, the final showdown. The Ultramarines, they changed things up. They realized that you can't really fight the Tyranids in the open field because, one, at this point, they're still not really sure how the command chain, how any of that works or if it even exists. And two, there's a lot more of them, so if you try to flank them, you're just going to get surrounded and eaten alive. It's better against the Tyranids to build static defenses, so that way, as long as you don't run out of ammo, you at least have a shot, rather than basically walking into a field in a nice orderly line and then getting devoured. So they fortify Ultramar. As we briefly mentioned earlier, the Damocles Crusade was going on. The Imperium was fighting the Tau Empire. It was quite the battlefield, quite the theater of war, I must say. In Caiaphas Cain's own words, he'll give the Tau one thing: they know how to put on a good war. But before the Imperium could do what the Imperium does best and drown the problem in bodies, shout out to the Guard, Behemoth is now like fully known about and urgently needs to be dealt with. Like, the Tau are a problem, the Tyranids are an Imperium-ending threat. So the Damocles Crusade is called off, the Ultramarines all return to Macragge, every single member of the chapter is on the planet. The forces of the Guard that were with them are pulled back as well. This is the showdown, because like I was saying earlier, this is the last stand between the Tyranids, like, having to deal with, like, proper resistance and basically having open season on a very decentralized portion of the Empire. So Macragge is fortified to a level not seen since the Horus Heresy. And despite this, the battle is brutal. The entire chapter defending the world, the Ultramarines themselves are largely focused around the Fortress of Hera, their fortress monastery, and where Gilliman's taken his nap still at this point in the lore. And the Tyranids, of course, focus on that as well, as it's the greatest source of resistance on the planet, and in long terms, the only thing between them and a proper meal. So if they take out this, it is time for the planet to end, and indeed the Imperium, arguably. Nevertheless, it's just horrible. Like, the skies are on fire with Tyranid spores raining down onto them. Millions more are still making it. Bugs are everywhere. And Marneus Calgar himself decides he's gonna throw down with the closest thing the Tyranids have to a champion and the leader. Eli, would you like to talk about that a little bit? Marneus Calgar versus Swarm Chad?
Yes, sir. I will. We can talk about the Battle of Cold Steel Ridge, which I summarized for you all. So here we go. It was during the Battle of Cold Steel Ridge that Marneus Calgar battled the Swarmlord. He had originally chosen the location because it took the Tyranids' greatest strength away from them, that of numbers. The Xenos were forced to cross the bridges and walk through valleys to become bottlenecked, as hailing bolter fire slaughtered them wholesale. Assault Marines threw themselves at the Synapse creatures, while scouts and bikes lured beasts into killing fields of tank fire. These stratagems of Calgar were working well until the greatest Tyranids the Ultramarine had ever seen entered the fray. The Swarmlord began to command his troops, countering the Ultramarines over and over again until the Horde began to break through and overrun the warriors. The Swarmlord sent Raveners and Trigons to massacre the trenches, making them into canals of blood. And from here the defense crumbled. The Space Marines turned to destroy the Xenos, creating a hole in their line, and letting a brood of Carnifexes through to destroy the armor support. Calgar knew he was about to lose, and so he brought in Thunderhawks to bring about a retreat. But the Swarmlord could tell his prey was about to escape, so he bellowed a challenge and charged into the fray with a retinue of Tyranid warriors, slaughtering every Space Marine in their way. Marneus was cut off from his honor guard because the Swarmlord, his cheeky little guy, had commanded Hormigons to feign death, and then they burst out of the piles of corpses to assail his Space Marine guardians. When the Swarmlord finally reached Calgar, the Ultramarine put up a valiant fight, but unfortunately, the authors wrote him as being already near death when the battle began, so it kind of takes away from the epicness of the duel. But whatever. I was disappointed when I read that. So he was defeated overall, battered and bruised. I didn't find the actual descriptions. I don't know if his arms actually got cut off like the TTS meme, but we can say his arms and legs got cut off for fun. But before the Swarmlord could kill him, his honor guard jumped in front of him and pushed the beast back. Aloysius, commander of the guard, sacrificed himself, fighting alone against the Swarmlord and the Swarmlord's guards, so that his brothers could escape on the newly arrived Thunderhawks. The Ultramarines' author armor will stay forever.
the greatest plot armor of them all.
Really, but yeah, the swarmlord's pretty freaking epic. He outsmarted Marne's calgar and beat him in a battle, and then they ran away.
Yeah, you don't want to be in melee range of the swarmlord. You spoiler
All
alert.
4 of his arms.
Unless you are tabletop avatar of Cain or Angron, you aren't winning that fight.
Yeah,
I like the fact the swarmlord has like integrated 4 bone sword arms, but uniquely for the swarmlord, the swords he has are made from a crystal that can't be found within the Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah,
So it's implied that it's a conquest of another galaxy.
I like the idea of Trazen just rubbing his hands together like, I want one of those.
I'm sure he has a swarmlord somewhere.
Yeah, for
He's got a
real.
collection of different like shades of like, this is an onyx shade one, and this is a purple
This
one.
is from Behemoth. This is from Leviathan.
Oh, the swarmlord's too cool. It's like sole reason to make me want to play Tyranids.
This is part of the swarm I unleashed on the Phalanx in Battlefleet Gothic because it was funny.
It also goes to show as well like, this particular like battle as well. Like as much as people might think, oh, the Tyranid hive mind / big, tendrils, whatever. Even though its like main thing is just feed, it only desires to just basically consume all biomass. It's not unintelligent in a way. It just doesn't need to be more than that only at times like such as battlefield. So it does have like genuine tactics and
Swarmlord's
like
smart.
strategy. It is smarter than a human in a way. Yeah.
It's
Smarter
like
than Calgar.
Yeah. It's like if like you gave an animal like the highest IQ on the planet, but you don't give it like proper sapience. So it's now the deadliest predator on the planet. It's just it doesn't give a shit about culture. It doesn't need books. It just needs food.
It's like an octopus and a shark combining.
I don't know. The only emotion I'm aware of that I've seen a Tyranid do is in the Space Marines 2 trailer where Captain Titus does his superhero landing and they take a step back and then the guy in charge is like,
pretty
"Oi,
awesome.
don't walk backwards." It's just a Space Marine's like, "Oh, babe. That's not just him. That's Captain Titus. He's gonna rip you a new one." It's
He
funny.
may be Lieutenant Titus now, but that just means he's more on the ground, ready to.
He's
rip
still
your
a
face
captain
off.
in my heart. I don't care what the Inquisition says. They can take me. He's still a captain.
Got 2 knuckle dusters. One says plot and one says armor.
And both are smashing in
man.
Leandros's face.
At least he lost the fight. Even if the authors gave him an excuse to lose the fight, which was so lame, but it's fine. Everything's fine.
What makes it
Scene
extra
is cool.
horror? Oh, sorry. Anyone else go first?
Oh, no, you first. I was gonna move on.
I'll say just like for people thinking, oh, that sounds kind of like a nice clash. What makes it like extra horrifying is that, like, obviously Space Marines are just using like bolter, blade, and flamer, with the Tyranid weapons just like being a regular guardsman on Macragge. Even though obviously Macragge is fortified beyond. Imagine fortifying Earth, like to create like trenches literally everywhere and buildings and guns, and then the Tyranid weapons are like even smaller bugs that can like eat.
Like they're flesh borer rifles. It shoots a thing at you. Like
They're just
it's
bugs,
a creature
yeah.
that eats you.
Through a sphincter.
Oh, God. It literally just their weapons, their swords, and they're obviously like their pincers. They can pierce through ceramite and they devour people from the like. It is basically any interaction with a Tyranid weapon. For most things, it's like you're Walking Dead essentially. So it is pretty.
Yeah. If you see an orifice, you duck away from it because you don't know what's coming out of it, and it's probably gonna kill you or hurt you. So
Whatever
you
it
just
is,
stay away from
it's
them.
unpleasant.
Yeah.
I want to mention one last thing though, which is like it's mentioned in the Devastation of Baal, which is another Tyranid siege, which we'll probably cover in a podcast one day. When it happens, like because obviously everyone like imagines like these battles in their head. The Tyranid swarm is so large that it actually creates like artificial night. So for when you're imagining these battles, that's how they're not swarming it by like a big thing covering the sun. That's like loads of tiny little bugs covering the sun. That's how many there are.
And both the Blood Angels and Ultramarines have had the toughest time. They're like, we need the Blood Angels, like we need every successor to defend the planet just from the Tyranids because they're that much of a threat.
Yeah.
And it's terrible.
I don't think Baal, their homeworld, was as Macragge is probably the most, other than Terra, the most fortified planet in the entire Imperium. So just go to show how
it used to be Cadia.
Yeah. Oh,
Did the Ultramarines even call back the other successor chapters? Was there no time
I
or
don't think they
whatever?
about them
did.
doing that, but I'm guessing
I don't think they do, but again, they've got like a massive multi-world spanning empire. So it's like you've got more guard than you would with Baal. It's
Yeah.
probably a bigger planet. It's got more infrastructure. It's got more resources, and it's the Ultramarines who are like
Unbeatable.
the
Best.
premier chapter.
As much
So
as we
it's
do
like,
say
yeah.
Ultramarines, we do want to mention that the guards. There's probably billions
Yeah.
of guards.
Yeah, a
It's-
lot
yeah.
of guardsmen.
doing
And
heavy
Titans. And they had Titans.
Oh yeah.
And, oh yeah,
It's just the Space Marines are just the Ultramarines, but it's the full might of the Imperial military is here right now.
it's literally it'll be a battle that would like destroy Earth if it was
Yeah.
like to rage on. It's incomprehensible.
But if you thought the chapter master of the Ultramarines nearly getting killed was bad, the first company's doing it even worse. They were at the northern pole of Macragge, in the frozen wastes where some more defensive batteries were located, and they were killed to a man. And just for reference,
Yep.
these were Terminators. They were the first company. These are the guys who get the extra primo stuff, and did not help them. Although
Yeah.
they,
That's bad.
for what it's worth, what I read was they killed so many Tyranids, they were like blanketing the ground like 10 corpses.
There's 6 deep.
Like, a lot, many corpses deep, more than 0 corpses deep.
It's a big
Flame of
loss for the
Hera.
Ultramarines.
The temple of the flame went out in the temple or whatever
Yep.
when they died, I think.
Yeah, and they couldn't recover loads of their Terminator armor suits because they were so badly damaged. Like, oh, that we can't do anything. It's just bits. We can't use this anymore.
It's in pieces, and so is the guy who was wearing it.
Yeah,
There's a cool
Especially-
diorama as well if you look it up, I think.
It's especially sad though because when we say first company, first company is
The elite.
the veterans. So a lot of these are like centuries old Ultramarines. Like there's no young blood in these.
and their panoplies are like multi-thousands of years old. They've been through countless, like some of it's probably from the Horus Heresy. It's been through like the darkest and brightest moments of the Ultramarines chapter's history, and now, oh, it's gone. We can't use it anymore. Oh, all that history
In a
gone.
single day, it's been taken. But even with all this, you must still remember, we are still dealing with the Ultramarines.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, the battle kind of just goes from the Ultramarines are all taking horrible losses, and then we won.
Well, this is because of space. It's because of
I
space
was-
that they
I'm gonna
win.
get to that.
All right, okay.
Because there's a thing about Hive Fleet Behemoth. It wasn't just moving as one big old blob of death. It was two halves of it were leapfrogging each other. So one half would devour a world, the second half would go ahead of them, and then that first half would go ahead of them, and then on and on and on and on and on. Problem was, the Ultramarines at very, very horrendous, devastating cost were able to beat the, alongside their allies of the Guard and whatnot, were able to hold off the fight on Macragge. They didn't kill every single Tyranid, but they were able to, at the very least, weaken that half enough that Macragge was no longer in danger of falling.
It's a numbers game, isn't it? Because they had to basically the Tyranid hive mind goes, you cost too much right now to
Yeah.
take over.
Problem was, the other half was in space, like you mentioned, Eli. So in the space around Macragge, fight's not done yet, as the other half arrived to finish off the weakened Ultramarines. And
The other half, oh my god.
Yeah, for real.
Well, there's a lot of Tyranids. What do you want?
Pain. One half almost wiped them out, and they're like, it's literally someone saying like, Box has been fighting with a hand tied behind his back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But thankfully, the Imperial Navy is here to save the day. The
Yay.
perhaps most forgotten about Navy in all of science fiction.
Yeah.
They're here. This is their one time to shine. It's this and Battlefleet Gothic.
Yeah, other than Admiral Spire being a badass, like Abaddon, pish, rubbish.
Yeah. I'm Admiral Spire. I don't give a damn about Abaddon. But yeah, the Navy is going at it, and the fighting is arguably even fiercer in space, because this is where the Tyranid bioships are, and they're ships. They're not like, a Carnifex is big. this is a spaceship that's made out of meat, so quite big. And
I hate that sentence. I hate that sentence
it's
so
what
much.
It is. It's the meat ship.
Oh god.
And the fighting is so horrible that the Imperium has to send in reinforcements from an entire other segmentum, segmentum Tempestus, which I don't remember where that is on the map. Is that the south one?
It won't be the one that's Terror. It won't be more.
That's the
It's not north, is it?
solar.
Yeah, it'll be more east or north, possibly.
I think it might be north because I think like isn't Ultramar like the most southeasterly place on the map, and then it's like you can only go up and left from there.
Segmentum Tempestus is south. It's the one below.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I think we should also mention Mr. Calgar is back on his feet.
Pardon
And
me.
he's-
I went.
Yeah,
he
can't
lives.
keep a good man down.
They gave him some replacement everything, and he's back on it. Unfortunately,
He's commanding stuff in space.
he is. Unfortunately, he cannot fight in space. However, being a man against a meat ship. So even with these reinforcements, it's not looking great. Cryptman, however, he's also in space, and he comes to a realization. Certain bioships, when they're destroyed, all of the surrounding ones just lose any kind of cohesion. They just go into like animalistic meltdown, which the Imperium would also learn applies to certain creatures on the ground, synapse creatures, as the way that works is it's how the hive mind directs them through these synapse creatures. And when you blow that one up, the rest of the smaller creatures are cut off from the hive mind and revert to like animalistic instincts.
Or as scientists call it, the Phantom Menace method. Where it's like you get the Gungans involved on the ground, and then you just blow up the ship, and then they go, "Oh, they're broken," and then they have a dance.
We did it.
They are broken.
Thank you,
Oh,
George,
man.
for being the worst.
Funny.
But even with this, again, a lot of Tyranids. This is the second half of Leviathan. Thankfully, the Imperium has a little something called an Emperor-class battleship, the Dominus Astra. It does not win by being like a dozen-mile-long battleship. It wins by charging into the center of the Tyranid blob of violence and detonating its warp drive. If you like Halo Reach, they George it.
Oh.
For the Emperor Bros.
For the Emperor. And they solve the problem of the second half of Behemoth in the most fitting way possible, sending all of the Tyranids to the Immaterium and making them some poor demon's problem to deal with.
It's not a move they can do, I think, because the Emperor class ship is they can't make them anymore, can they?
No, they can't make them anymore, and maintaining them alone is already like straining the Imperium. So yeah, that's not a reliable throw the battleship at it tactic.
Yeah, it's not a holdo maneuver where it's like I could just jump through space and blow up these stars. Like, no, you can only do it once. Why? Oh,
Because we don't have
expensive.
a lot of those.
Yeah.
You just bankrupted 10 sectors.
Yeah.
And with that, the battle is won. But the aftermath is a little rough. The Ultramarines lost so
A
many...
little.
A little. The Ultramarines lost so many men that on top of the whole first company, that it took them almost a century for them to clear Macragge of the remnants of the Tyranids, and even longer for them to reach full strength. And they were only able to even do that because the Blood Angels, Dante was a cool guy and sent several entire companies to help them out. Because they had, like, no one left.
Good old Genesis chapter stepping up.
I imagine that helped the losses. The Ultramarines like, right.
Just going, oh boy, I can't wait to be an Ultramarine. It's finally time. And then you see all the dead, and you're like, oh,
man.
it kind of
I
feels
don't wanna be an
bittersweet.
Ultramarine.
And there's no Terminator armor either because it's all been broken. Oh, that sucks.
Calgar went to the chapter master of the Genesis chapters, like, how many companies do you have? I need them.
And they bullied the other successors into taking their Terminator armor. Like, you don't need this. We're more important. We're going to repaint
The
it.
Ultramarines. On Calth, the planet was somewhat resettled. The Tyranids evidently hadn't quite eaten it. But not without issue, because that Carnifex wasn't dead, baby.
Ooh,
Old
baby.
One-Eye. He was freed by salvagers from a block of ice, who assumed he was dead and were thinking this will fetch a high price on some shady market or whatever. Then his regeneration kicked in. It wasn't enough to heal his face, but it was enough to heal everything else. And for years from that day, Old One-Eye would just periodically ransack cities on Calth.
He's like the Sly Marbo of Tyranid.
Yeah. And every now and then they declare him as dead, and then he would come back.
Then he goes, Baba Yaga, and then he just runs around killing people. He's like, oh no, he's back.
And he's got his own cult.
He does.
So
He's
epic.
a cult that worships his body, which would indicate he's presently dead, but you can also use him on tabletop, so probably not. Probably just take him.
Nah, he's fine.
If I remember correctly, doesn't he get... He actually is resurrected by some of the high fleets, but as a unique one where it's missing an eye.
That's a theory.
It's a theory, or it's like a...
The cult just worships Old One-Eye in general. I don't know if they worship his corpse.
Yeah. I read like they have his body or one of his bodies with however it works. He also could just be hibernating there, and every now and then he wakes up and their god just walks off.
He's still stuck on Calth.
He is on Calth.
But he pops up on
he's
other
just like,
worlds.
I hate this planet, and he keeps waking up and go, they keep trying to wake me up.
He also just shows up other places sometimes. He just does.
Just a troll.
Just to be a goober. And although the High Fleet was broken, it was not completely defeated that day. It was split into numerous smaller splinter fleets, which, although much smaller and not with the same level of guidance from the hive mind, proved to be a major pain in the ass for the galaxy for centuries to come. There was one battle where they were fighting against the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Skitarii commander in charge actually figured out a great way to deal with them. Off-product gas from Promethium refineries, that he saturated the atmosphere with it and then lit it on fire, which, obviously a bit of a radical move, but it did stop like a bulk of the Tyranids from reaching landfall and horribly weakened them, which you would think this is a great strategy to keep going forward, because if the Tyranids are on a planet, it's better to damage it than just let the Tyranids have it. Except he returned to a Forge World, the information was given to the Forge World databanks, and then they forgot about it.
Classic,
yeah, that's
This is a certified Imperium of Man moment.
Well, it's probably hard to pull that off on planets that aren't only Mechanicus planets, where people actually have to have an atmosphere.
It's definitely situational, but just the information itself was just it's still there too. It's not lost, they just forgot it's there.
Knowing the Mechanicum, they probably killed a bunch of civilians in the process.
Oh,
but
yeah,
they were acceptable losses.
Flesh is weak, bro.
Yeah.
And, another splinter fleet fed on. This one actually ended up happening 2 centuries later. It became High Fleet Gorgon, and they would go be a pain to the Tau Empire for some time. Until they weren't. The Tau kind of just pretty handily defeated them.
Is that the one that Farsight fought?
I believe it was.
Or is that a different one?
No, I think that's a different...
it's Kraken.
Yeah,
I think.
What happened with the Gorgon was that the Tau and Tyranids got into an adaptation fight where they kept countering each other's tactics so fast that on the fly they would be doing something different every 5 minutes. And the Tau won. Good for the Tau.
When the Tyranids invaded on Macragge at the North Pole, I'm guessing the Tyranids, when they produced the bioforms, they obviously adapted them to the cold and then the water.
Yeah, they would have done that. It's just that the adaptation of the Tyranids isn't, as with much of them at this point, isn't fully understood.
Ooh, one thing that one thing I liked about the Battle of Macragge, things were going really well till one of their orbital defense cannons stopped working because the hive mind commanded thousands of gargoyles to just throw themselves and clog the cannon with their bodies. Not bad. And there was swarms of bugs climbing up the Titans and pushing them over and stuff, killing people.
They took out the orbital Mac platforms.
Yeah, rip. Breach has fallen.
I'm just, whenever you say about they did this to it, I'm just thinking of Bear Grylls. It's adapt, improve, overcome. Just like a Tyranid going, I'm going to have to drink my own piss to survive. You're you don't. No. Just doing that for television. Stop it.
Just eat the Marine. Stop. And then, what What's up?
Like I said, their adaptation though, I believe they only do it a little bit because obviously, in terms of biomass cost, it obviously factors in more just to basically specialize the Tyranid. So that even the way the Tyranids are designed, they're designed to be the most efficient killing warriors, like their forms, because they could technically make it like a perfect being, but it wouldn't be efficient in terms of biomass.
Like they could make everything the swarmlord, but efficiency dictates that's not good. It's why the Imperium doesn't just only have knights and titans. It's like you need smaller stuff. And the last of the splinter fleets was a much more devastating one than the rest. I accidentally called it a splinter fleet of Leviathan in the dock. That's not right. It adapted from its losses on Ultramar, and no longer was it sending out like massive swarms of lesser Tyranids. Instead, it focused on producing a greater number of larger bioforms. And this is important because they were not fighting back against the Ultramarines. They'd moved on to the planet of Racker 9, where that's the Roman numeral for 9. Right. I wrote that down and then forgot.
Fair.
XI. It's IX, that's 9. Yes.
Yes.
They were fighting, and on that planet was the Night House of House Raven. Imperial Knights are getting in on this too. Good for them.
Ooh.
Problem was, these Tyranids were fiercely intelligent. They were the bigger ones, so they were much more capable of going toe-to-toe with the Knights. And as we were saying before, the Tyranids aren't complete beasts. When the hive mind's guiding them, they're fiercely intelligent. And, they goaded and played on the Knights' honor to isolate them into one-on-one battles from their comrades, and then swarm them with Tyranids.
Yeah, and then the knights go, they're not fighting one-on-one, that's not very sporting, pip pip, and then they get their pipe in their mouth and do a charge, do all things like put a trench in, go on.
Yeah. A bit more Bretonian on the accent, gives it that.
Having with this, Rakor 9 fell, and the knights believed they witnessed like a dark mirror of their own feudal traditions, which I think they're just gaslighting themselves into thinking that, but whatever. They think they witnessed the Tyranids being somewhat feudal, and in response to that, they named this splinter fleet the Court of the Nephilim King, which is a very cool name.
It's cool.
That goes
Holy
hard.
frick.
Not gonna lie.
And,
Yeah,
Starting
you can say
Tyranids
one thing
right
about
now.
night houses, they know how to name stuff.
That is very true. And they vowed vengeance against the Tyranid threat. And with that, the First Tyrannic War is over. Although the Imperium, they were aware of the remaining splinter fleets, and they were, going to fight them as they needed to. They kind of relaxed. They figured, like, all right, that was the Tyranids. That was, there's the army.
Oh, it's over, right?
There's the threat. They figured, like, going forward that all of, like, the Tyranids they would end up encountering on the eastern, portion of the galaxy, their splinter fleets of Leviathan, or I kept saying Leviathan, Behemoth after it withdrew from Macragge to find more food. They figure, like, all right, it's Behemoth again. It's more of these guys. We'll clean them up. And, initially that was probably true. Like, the first couple of years after Macragge, it's like, yeah, that's probably Behemoth. But it wasn't until 999 M41 that the Imperium realized, Behemoth isn't all of them. It's not even most of them. Uh-oh. And one final note, I know you were asking earlier, Hal, if we were to do any bit of a lead-off into the rest of the Tyranid threat. A little bit of a hint on what Cryptman gets up to. I won't say exactly what, in case we'll leave that for a later episode, either on the Tyranids as a whole or the other Tyrannic Wars. But he did some stuff that, even to the Inquisitions, like, that was beyond what the limits of acceptability. So pretty atrocious stuff Cryptman did. Although, in saying that, they called him many things, namely a radical, a traitor, and a fool. But does anyone want to take a guess what they didn't call him?
Wrong.
Inefficient.
Hal had it.
Nice.
So,
That's epic.
The Tyranids have just begun with the First Tyrannic War. And but for now, that will be it. Does anyone have any questions on the bug fight?
I think I will say that there are, I think, what's currently going on in lore. There's the Fourth Tyrannic War, so there is a little. We will possibly cover some of the other ones, although I don't believe the other ones are quite to the same level as detail as the First Tyrannic War. Maybe
the third the third might be. I'm not as sure about the second, but the third might be because the third has like the defensive ball, and it's when you learn that the Tyranids aren't just coming from the east.
We'll that will be the devastation of Baal. I think we'll save that one for a. That's almost an episode in its entirety because it's such an amazing sort of version of a tyrannic fight. And there's also some demon shenanigans, but we'll save that for another time though.
Yeah,
I would say
it's the event that cements the Blood Angels of like, right, Tyranids are our nemesis basically. Every media you see the Blood Angels involved in, it's pretty much them versus the Tyranids.
Yeah, and if some final closing words. Frankly, I find the idea of a bug that thinks offensive, and I'm from Buenos Aires, and I say kill them all.
Nice.
You
I
can't,
think
you can't talk
sorry?
about the Tyranids and not bring up Starship Troopers at least once.
And then Marnius Calgar kicked them out of the first war, and he went, "It's afraid of us! It's afraid of us!" And then the Tyranids went, "No, propaganda. We're not afraid. We're just going to eat you from a different direction. It's fine."
I think if you are particularly more like the newer side of Warhammer lore, the First Tyrannic War, in terms of the general like overarching lore story of it, is actually quite a. I do find it like quite an enjoyable one, just because it's a proper like. Obviously, it's mostly obviously Ultramarine kind of fan service at some point, but it does show the overarching kind of grittiness of just general war in how the sort of the 40th millennium behaves and how it just really is on the ground level, because it just shows you the absolute planet level destruction that just even a small set. I mean, it's one thing where it's like Elfinic can be a bad trope where it's like, I was only using a fraction of my power, and then someone's like, thinking of Eldari / Yanari books here, Slanesh. bad use of that.
And then 1,000 aspect warriors get licked to death.
More about that another time, hopefully.
No,
but
never.
No,
there is no Yanari trilogy.
But the Tyranid stuff is just so. As much as they are like the kind of like that faceless swarm villain in a way, they do it quite well to the point of it delves more into like the horror of 40k, because it's hard to kind of get across how genuinely like well they write it in the book, but how horrifying just a Tyranid invasion is, because it's not just like, we're playing a tower defense game and then we're going to shoot into the numberless horde. It is literally air, ground, and literally under the earth too, like literally things, great worms and creatures, and even little tiny ones like bite your ankle.
Yeah, there's a great episode of Hammer and Bolter where it's the Cadians fighting Tyranids, and it's just the poor guardsmen, and there's big ones, there's little ones, there's ones that just drop on them and explode and cover them with corrosive acid.
Yeah.
There's one bit where a guy's being eaten by like 10 of the little ones, and the guards just like kind of carry measures like, no, we've got to leave him, we need to leave him. But I feel like the First Tyrannic War could be summed up by the band Buckman Turner Overdrive just saying, "You ain't seen nothing yet, baby, you ain't seen nothing yet," and that's basically the First Tyrannic War of them going like, "Yeah, we ain't even started."
I think
they haven't even broken. Oh, what's up?
No, you guys are. I'll finish.
And they didn't even break out all of the stops because
Nope.
in the future wars, the Gene Stealers are going to be a threat too.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah.
Now you can't even trust your neighbor.
Are Tyrannic War veterans still in the tabletop?
I don't think so. I think those
Sad.
when they
Yeah,
cut out the
first
first
one,
one. Yeah.
Sad. Holy. I will never forgive GW for this.
Well, there might be fourth Tyrannic War veterans. There's a lieutenant with
I guess.
I feel like First Tyrannic War veterans were all gone by this point. It's like, right, we were a veteran of one, now you're pushing your luck. I've been ready. Like the second war, the fourth? Really?
when was the date for the First Tyrannic War? Is it 700s, 800s? M40, yeah? Do you know the specific date of when the First Tyrannic War?
745 M41.
Because it does a lore stuff. That's quite a like
It's like yesterday.
A lot of in Warhammer history, it's kind of a lot of things happen in M9999. Like M999. So a lot of things are like
shit hits the fan date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in general, like Warhammer history, because of how the Imperium works, history is often forgotten and misremembered, or written down in like some administrative thing written by a man who's on a world in literally a planet that writes notes, so you can never find it. So it is crazy how, in a way, this is almost ancient news in terms of like, again, like you're probably right, like not many of the current Ultramarines are basically ones who lived through the Tyrannic War. Because again, obviously Space Marines do die a lot.
Especially because most of them got eaten.
Yeah, most of them did
and I reckon a lot of the Imperium doesn't even know what a Tyranid is, because it's like, well, they're not going to survive a Tyranid invasion more than likely, and it's only a couple of 100 years old. I mean, Dante's 4 times older than the first invasion. He's like, get off my lawn, you new kids on the block,
Bjorn's
ruining
been
my
hanging around
day.
since the beginning.
And Bjorn is like, I've been around ages. What's these bugs? Let's squish them. Yay.
In reference, it would be like someone in our history going like, oh, you know, the American War of Independence, and then, or the Declaration of Independence, and then you kind of go, yeah, that thing, that, you know, like, and then that's obviously so many, in a way, quite a few generations back. So the modern people of the Imperium are like, oh, Tyranid, they'll be literally, the war will be carved in marble and stone at this point. That's how old it would probably be to the Imperials. Speaking of, I'm glad the Ultramarines were such a snack, because that was a delicious amount of lore we got there. We got it. Is anyone have any other closing comments other than that one?
I like the Ultramarines.
Yeah, I miss the first Tyrannic War veterans. They will live in our hearts forever.
R.I.P. With that being said, though,
kill them all.
Colin playing the. With that being said, though, we hope you guys all enjoyed. Obviously, there was quite a little bit of more of a short episode this time because we probably overloaded a bit too much recently. But obviously, we do like to cover the Tyranids, particularly this time with the release of their codex. So, you know, there'll be loads of gorgeous models coming out recently. I hope Eli has not bought them all immediately.
I'll refrain. I'm buying Star Wars Legion right now.
Nord Assimilator, my beloved.
Mommy?
With that being said, though, we hope you guys all enjoyed. Obviously, if you would like, we obviously had the question of the week at the beginning. Obviously, we're happy to have some really funny answers. We appreciate it. Or any comments just in general about the topic. And also other ones that you would like us to cover. If there's more Tyranid ones, like definitely, like obviously make your voice be heard, because we obviously look out for what you guys want to see, or any other topics in general. And I think next time, a little bit of I'm not going to say who it is, but we will possibly have a guest on for our next episode. Andy, do you want to explain what the topic is? Possibly.
Well, I know Marnius Calgar in some circles has been noted to have said, you're insisting on a fistin'. And although it's not Marnius Calgar, we will be covering another fist-influenced faction, which will be the Crimson Fists. Yay!
Yeah,
everyone's favourite.
A slight relation to Dantiok, the comment earlier about the sofa device blowing up, because we were following someone else who was also involved in that. No spoilers yet, though. The Crimson Fists have been, I think, one of the earliest chapters in the entire.
Yeah,
second
founding, and they were the first ones on the cover, weren't they? With the codexes.
Yes.
Yeah.
See the epic art.
There'll be some. So again, some callback to people who've probably been around since that launch itself, and they probably even remember it. So hope you guys enjoy that one. And obviously,
very good at posing at last stands.
Yes, they're always ready to stand the last in time.
And we may even have someone special there.
Yes, can't wait to show you.
I won't be there.
We can't no spoilers yet, unfortunately. But we will let you all know very soon. And with that being said, hope you guys all enjoyed, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Bye, everyone.
Farewell, love you. Glory to the Star Children. They will not eat you. They will
give you hugs and kisses.
Yes, holy union.
Kill them all. Kill them all.
It's just holy union. It's not eating. It's holy union.
From what I said, I say, kill them all.
Yeah.